The squadron broke apart in pure panic, jets scattering, radios screaming, survival all but gone. And then a single F-35 dropped in from nowhere. But here's the twist. It wasn't just any pilot. It was a simple woman, and in one pass, she changed the outcome of the entire war. Stay with us, because the secret behind this flight is bigger than any mission file you've ever heard. This is a simple woman. Smash subscribe, and let's dive into the untold story. The squadron broke apart in a storm of panic. Missiles ripped the sky. Tracer fire burned like lightning, and pilots screamed across comms with the hopeless edge of men who knew they would not make it home. Their formation shattered, jets peeled off in every direction, some spiraling down in smoke, others clawing at altitude as if height alone could keep them alive. Major Kieran Holt shouted orders that dissolved into static, his voice cracking under the weight of chaos. Every radar warning blared at once, a chorus of impending death. On the ground below, enemy batteries stood like iron teeth, spitting fire into the air. The mission that was supposed to be quick and precise had turned into a slaughterhouse in the sky. Lieutenant Eric Danner, the youngest in the unit, felt his hands shaking. On the controls, the sweat blinding his eyes inside the helmet. He had no target anymore, no path, only the desperate instinct to survive. The command center hundreds of miles away listened in silence, maps glowing. On their screens, icons of friendly jets disappearing one by one. General Ramirez gripped the edge of the console, his jaw set but his eyes betraying dread. The entire operation, weeks of planning, millions in resources, the very balance of the battlefield, was unraveling in minutes. And then, cutting across the static and the fear, came a new voice. Calm, steady, almost too quiet for the storm raging around it. Viper 7 checking in, approaching from the west. Holt froze in his cockpit, his head snapping toward the radar, as if the voice alone could bring order back to the screen. Danner blinked, barely believing what he heard. The commander at HQ raised his head, whispering the name like a prayer he hadn't dared to hope for. Captain Elara Voss. They called her just a simple woman. A civilian-turned-pilot. A mechanic who'd once turned wrenches in a hangar while others flew the glory runs. She was never meant to carry the war on her shoulders. And yet, in that moment, her arrival was the only thing keeping the squadron from complete annihilation. She came in low, her F-35 hugging the earth, sliding beneath the enemy's radar net like a ghost in daylight. She had been late to launch. Her aircraft had needed urgent repair. But Elara knew every bolt of the jet, every weakness, every sound the engine should make. Because before she ever flew it, she had rebuilt it. Holt's voice cracked again, this time not with fear but frustration. Voss, stay out. You'll get torn apart down here. Elara said nothing for a heartbeat. The world filled with missile warnings and the endless thump of her heart. Then she spoke, flat and cold, as if daring the fire itself. Watch me. The camera of the mind follows her jet cutting through smoke and chaos, sliding under a curtain of radar sweeps. Every movement precise, controlled, and impossible to replicate. While the rest of the squadron scattered like frightened birds, Elara. SF-35 was the hawk, wings drawn tight, eyes locked forward. Eric Danner's breath caught. For a second he forgot he was about to die. He watched her maneuver, disbelief etched into his voice as he whispered into comms. She's going straight through, and in the command bunker the room went still. Generals, analysts, even the clerks holding coffee cups, they all leaned. in toward the screen as her blip carved across enemy territory. A simple woman, they had said, but in that instant, the fate of the mission, the survival of the squadron, and the silence of the battlefield hung on her alone, and the world was about to see what one pass could do. Before she ever touched the controls of an F-35, Elara Voss was just another face in a cavernous hangar, her hair tied back under a grease-stained cap, her hands raw from hours of tightening bolts and swapping out parts. She had grown up far from military academies, raised in a small town where engines were her only escape. At 16, she could strip down a carburetor faster than most grown men. At 18, she was fixing farm equipment by day and studying aerospace engineering at night. But none of that erased the label stamped on her the moment she walked through the gates of the Air Force program: civilian, outsider, too simple for war. When she joined as a mechanic, she didn't expect to fly. She expected to support, to keep others alive by ensuring their machines never failed. Yet she studied every schematic of the F-35, memorizing hydraulic flows, learning what each sound meant when the jet was alive and screaming down a runway. She could hear problems others missed, feel vibration patterns through the soles of her boots, diagnose faults before the computers did. Pilots respected her skills but laughed at the thought of her ever stepping into the cockpit. "You're brilliant with wrenches, Voss," Holt once told her, back when he was a rising officer, "but flying is different. Leave that to the ones who were born for it." She never argued, she just listened. And then she worked harder. Her chance came unexpectedly. During a training exercise, one of the jets malfunctioned mid-preparation. Its assigned pilot grounded. The commanding officer asked for a volunteer to run a diagnostic in flight, essentially a test run. No pilot wanted it. It was dangerous, a probable waste. Elara stepped forward without hesitation. Holt shook his head, muttering that she wouldn't last 5 minutes in the air. The CO looked at her, saw the steady certainty in her eyes, and reluctantly agreed. That short flight changed everything. She not only handled the machine flawlessly, but returned with a log of subtle anomalies no one else had detected. The jet had been hours from catastrophic failure. Her instinct saved a multi-million-dollar asset, and possibly the life of whoever would have flown it next. The brass couldn't ignore her. They offered her the chance to enter flight training. Whispers filled the halls. "She's just a mechanic. She's just a simple woman." Cadets who had been groomed since childhood mocked her behind her back. Instructors doubted her stamina, her reflexes, her composure. Yet every time she climbed into the simulator, every time she strapped into a real trainer jet, she proved them wrong. Her control was unnervingly precise. Where others relied on brute reflex, she relied on knowledge of airflow, of system limits, of what the aircraft itself was trying to tell her. Still, the stigma clung to her. At mess halls, she ate alone. At strategy sessions, her suggestions were dismissed until repeated by someone with a pedigree. Some days, even her fellow mechanics, once her peers, looked at her differently, as if she'd betrayed her class by daring to fly. But Elara never flinched. She carried herself with the same calm she had in the hangar, eyes always steady, voice quiet. The louder the mockery, the more silent she became, and silence was its own weapon. The nickname stuck. Simple woman, a backhanded joke, whispered like an insult. She let it hang in the air, never correcting them. But inside she was filing the words away, turning them into fuel. Because she understood something her doubters didn't. Simplicity wasn't weakness. Simplicity was focus. It was stripping away ego, pedigree, bravado, and leaving only skill. By the time she earned her wings, she had the highest simulator scores in her class. Her instructors, grudgingly at first, admitted she was different. Holt, watching from afar, muttered that war would eat her alive. Others predicted she would fold under real fire. She smiled only once, on graduation day, when the colonel pinned her badge. It wasn't joy, it was defiance, hidden beneath calm eyes. Years later, as missiles tore the sky and the squadron disintegrated, those same whispers still trailed her. She's just a simple woman. And yet, in that storm, it was that simple woman's jet carving low across the battlefield, holding the fate of everyone above the fire. Smoke still clung to the horizon when Elara finally crossed the last checkpoint toward the combat zone. Her jet had almost been grounded hours earlier. A faulty hydraulic line had refused to seal, and every mechanic had written it off. But Elara had stayed behind, sleeves rolled, tightening, rewiring, coaxing the machine back to life with the same stubborn patience that had once made her the best mechanic in the hangar. By the time the F-35 roared free of the runway, the rest of the squadron was already deep in hostile airspace and already unraveling. Now she skimmed the earth, the terrain a blur of ridges and burned fields beneath her. She could almost feel the ground reaching up, daring her to miscalculate, daring her to let fear lift her higher where the radar would catch her. But Elara knew better. Low was survival, low was invisible. She trusted the hum of the engine beneath her, the whisper of air clawing past her canopy, every sense locked in, every nerve sharpened. On comms, panic reigned. Holt's voice, once steady, broke apart with each order. Pull north, regroup. No, east, east. Missile lock. Brake, brake. The chatter collapsed into static as another aircraft vanished, another pilot silenced. Eric Danner's voice cracked through, young and strained. "Major, I can't shake it. I'm losing control." His breath cut off in a strangled gasp. That was when Elara spoke. Calm, cold. Viper 7, approaching from the west. The net went dead for a heartbeat, as if the entire squadron had turned to listen. Holt spat back instantly, the sharp edge of authority still clinging to him. "Voss, you're late. We're being chewed apart out here. Stay clear, that's an order." She dipped lower, radar sweeps arcing overhead, blind to her presence. Her eyes narrowed as the target grid came into view, a nest of enemy batteries, their barrels glowing red with the heat of relentless fire. "Copy your situation, Major," she said, her tone flat. "I see the target." "Negative," Holt barked, fury mixing with disbelief. "You'll never get through. You're flying into a wall of steel. Pull back!" Elara felt the thrum of the jet through her bones. She had heard that tone from Holt before, back in training, when he told her she would break under pressure. He had been wrong then, he was wrong now. "I'm going low," she said simply. Danner's voice cracked in. "She can't. There's no altitude left down there." The warning screamed in her headset as she descended further, the earth so close she could see the dust swirl in her wake. One misstep and she would be nothing but fire on the ground. Yet her voice remained steady. Holt nearly shouted into the comms, "Voss, if you try this, you won't last 5 seconds. Do you hear me?" Her answer came like a blade sliding free of its sheath. Quiet, certain, unshakable. "Watch me." The words hung in the net, silencing even the chaos. For a moment, the fear that had broken the squadron held its breath. Her F-35 sliced forward, threading between the arcs of anti-air fire, using valleys and ridgelines like armor. She was flying blind to every conventional instrument, but not to the aircraft itself. She felt the strain in the hydraulics, the rhythm of the turbines, the subtle shift in balance with every correction. No simulator had ever taught her this. Only the long nights in the hangar, listening to machines breathe, could. From his cockpit, Danner caught glimpses of her streaking form. She's going straight in. His disbelief was almost awe. At HQ, General Ramirez leaned over the plotting board, watching her blip carve an impossible line across enemy defenses. Around him, officers muttered, shaking their heads, waiting for the inevitable red 10th, but it didn't come. Her signal pressed forward, alive, relentless. And in that silence the whispers returned, the old words dripping with scorn. She's just a simple woman. Only now, in the middle of a sky collapsing around them, that simple woman was the only pilot moving toward the fire, while every other ace had scattered to survive. The firestorm thickened as Elara pushed deeper into the kill zone. Radar lock alarms shrieked in her helmet, but she ignored them. She knew what the enemy expected. Another pilot climbing to evade, turning broadside, bleeding speed. They had seen it 100 times. That was why they believed their wall of steel was impenetrable. But Elara wasn't flying by their rules. She stayed low, so low the heat of her engines left scars of vapor in the fields below. The first missile screamed past her canopy, close enough to rattle the jet. She rolled hard left, the horizon flipping, earth and sky trading places in a blur. A second launch blossomed ahead, the contrail slicing toward her like a drawn sword. She didn't pull up. She dove, forcing the jet into a near-impossible angle, alarms shrieking in protest. The missile's seeker overshot, streaking into empty sky before detonating harmlessly behind her. On comms, Holt's voice cracked again. "Voss, break off! That's an order!" She said nothing. Her focus was absolute. The target node loomed ahead, the enemy's command bunker, its roof bristling with radar dishes and control arrays. Around it, dozens of launchers pivoted wildly, hunting her, but the closer she drew, the harder it was for them to aim without risking each other. She had found the blind spot she had been searching for. Arik Danner's breathing rasped in the channel. She's through. She's actually through. From HQ, General Ramirez stood frozen, watching, her lone blip carve a line across the screen where no aircraft should have survived. Officers crowded around, muttering disbelief. "She can't. No way at that altitude. It's suicide." But none of them looked away. Elara armed her payload. Every calculation ticked in her mind: velocity, angle, turbulence, the narrow window before enemy fire corrected. She had one pass. No second chance. No turning back. The ground lit up beneath her as 3 more missiles launched. She yanked the stick, sliding between their converging trails, the cockpit shaking with the violence of air compression. Metal groaned, rivets strained, but the jet held. She whispered under her breath, not a prayer, not desperation, but command: hold together. At the perfect second she pulled level, crosshairs locking on the bunker, her thumb pressed down, the bombs released, vanishing in a blink. A heartbeat of silence, and then the earth convulsed. The bunker erupted in a geyser of fire and dust, radar dishes spinning into fragments, control arrays vaporized in an instant. Shockwaves rippled outward, toppling launchers like toys. The entire air defense grid flickered, sputtered, then went black. Across dozens of miles, enemy radar screens died at once, leaving their operators staring into void. Above, pilots who had been seconds from death suddenly felt the sky clear. Lock-on alarms ceased. The shriek of radar threats fell silent. For the first time in hours, there was air to breathe. "Target destroyed," Elara reported, her voice steady, as if she had simply completed a routine drill. "Squadron clear." Dana let out a choked laugh, half disbelief, half relief. She did it. She actually did it. In his cockpit, Holt gripped the controls, his chest heaving. He had ordered her to turn back. He had been certain she'd never make it through. Now, because of her, the surviving pilots had a way out. At HQ, the silence stretched before General Ramirez finally exhaled. Around him, officers stared wide-eyed at the dead radar feeds, at the empty sweep of the battlefield. One muttered, "Impossible." Another whispered, "Who flies like that?" The general's gaze never left her lone signal on the screen, banking away from the fire she had left in ruins. His voice was low, almost reverent. "A simple woman," he said. "That's what they called her. And she just saved them all." Around the skies, scattered jets began to regroup, their comms no longer breaking with fear but with disbelief. "Follow Voss. She's got the corridor clear. I'm still airborne because of her." That was one pass, just one pass. Elara didn't respond. She angled her F-35 away, eyes fixed ahead, already calculating fuel, distance, and the path home. For her, it wasn't about glory. It was about precision, about survival, about proving that silence and focus could cut deeper than fear and doubt ever could. Behind her, the battlefield was transformed. What had been a death trap minutes earlier was now a corridor of escape. Pilots who had resigned themselves to fireballs in the sky found themselves flying free, alive, carried on the wake of one woman's defiance. The squadron had scattered in panic. Now they gathered again under her shadow. And for the first time since the mission began, there was hope. The command center had gone utterly still. Moments ago, it had been a storm of frantic voices, officers shouting over each other, radios crackling with the cries of pilots being torn from the sky. Now, the only sound was the low hum of equipment and the faint clatter of debris reports streaming in from satellites. Every radar dish that had once hunted their squadron had gone dark at the same instant. The room felt as though the war itself had paused. General Ramirez stood in the center, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the operations table. His eyes were locked on the single green blip moving steadily away from the fire zone. His lips parted and the words slipped out before he could stop them. "Who was that?" No one answered. Analysts leaned over their screens, trying to confirm what they had just seen. Technicians scrolled furiously through diagnostic feeds, certain the data had to be wrong. How could one aircraft carve a path through an entire grid of defenses? How could one pilot accomplish in seconds what entire squadrons had failed to do in hours? Colonel Strauss, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, cleared his throat. That maneuver, it shouldn't be possible at that altitude. His voice carried more disbelief than authority. He turned toward Ramirez as if begging for an explanation that did not exist. On the comms, the silence broke. Elara's voice came through, crisp and unshaken, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "Target destroyed. Squadron clear. Returning to base." The matter-of-fact delivery landed like a hammer. Around the table, junior officers exchanged glances. They'd expected shouts of triumph, the strained relief of someone who had clawed out of death's grip. Instead, it was a simple status report, clinical, detached, almost casual. "She doesn't even sound out of breath," one analyst whispered. "She doesn't sound human," another muttered. General Ramirez ignored them. He remembered her name, he remembered the file. Captain Elara Voss, a civilian mechanic before the program had bent its rules to give her a slot in the cockpit. He had been one of many who had doubted the decision. Too simple, he had thought. Not forged in the academies, not bred for combat. He had nodded along when others scoffed, when Holt sneered at the idea of her leading anything more dangerous than a maintenance checklist. But now Holt himself sat in his cockpit somewhere over the battlefield, alive only because of her. At HQ, a colonel who had once dismissed her training scores leaned back, his face pale. "I told my men she wouldn't last the year," he murmured. An aide chimed in, remembering the nickname that had followed her everywhere. They called her a simple woman. The phrase hung in the air, no longer mocking but stripped of its poison. Now it sounded like an indictment of them, not her. Ramirez straightened slowly, his eyes never leaving her blip, as it glided calmly away from the ruins she had created. "Simple," he said, almost to himself. "No. Precise." A ripple of silence followed, the kind that meant everyone in the room understood something had shifted. The hierarchy of expectations had been shattered. The outsiders, the underestimated, the ones dismissed as unworthy, they had all just been given a champion. Elara spoke again, her voice cutting through their thoughts, requesting fuel check-in. Estimated time to base, 35 minutes. It was so ordinary, so procedural, that it left them speechless. After all, how could she speak of minutes and fuel gauges when entire battlefields had just tilted on her actions? One young officer, unable to contain himself, whispered, "She just redefined this war." Ramirez finally tore his gaze from the screen. He looked around the table, at every officer, every analyst, every soldier who had doubted, mocked, or dismissed her. His voice was steady, grave, and undeniable. Never underestimate her again. In the silence that followed, no one dared disagree. And above the battlefield, the lone F-35 carried on, its pilot silent, her focus already beyond the wreckage left behind. In the enemy command bunker, chaos spread faster than fire. Screens that once pulsed with confident sweeps of radar now showed nothing but static. Operators shouted over one another, slamming fists on consoles, trying to recalibrate systems that had been flawless just minutes earlier. The commander, a hard-faced general with decades of experience, stared at the blank displays as if sheer willpower could bring them back to life. "What happened?" he roared. "Where are the feeds? Where is the coverage?" A technician's voice cracked. "Sir, the central node is gone. There was a strike, direct hit." Everything collapsed at once. The general's jaw tightened. Impossible. No squadron could have pushed through that net. Another officer shook his head, pale beneath the harsh lights. It wasn't a squadron, it was one jet. The room froze. One jet? The words didn't make sense. Reports began to trickle in from the field. Missile crews described glimpses of a shadow streaking through valleys, hugging the ground where no sane pilot would fly. Others swore they had locked on, only to watch their missiles veer wide as if the target simply vanished. A handful insisted they never saw anything at all, just an explosion where their command bunker had stood seconds before. By nightfall, the whispers had already started. They called it the ghost pilot. Some claimed it was unmanned, an experimental drone. Others swore it was a phantom, a weapon the West had hidden for years. The most superstitious muttered about spirits of war, a curse summoned on their defenses. Fear spread in the absence of facts, and facts were in short supply. Meanwhile, Elara Voss said nothing. She didn't hear the rumors, didn't see the confusion she had left behind. Her canopy reflected only the fading glow of fire in the distance and the steady line of horizon ahead. She checked her gauges, adjusted her trim, and flew on. In her headset, Dana's voice crackled back to life, ragged but alive. "Captain Voss, I don't know what you did back there, but Thank you. You saved us. Elara kept her tone flat. Professional. Stay with your formation, Lieutenant. Head for the corridor. We're not out yet. He swallowed hard, unable to mask the awe in his words. They'll be talking about this for years. But she offered no reply. Her silence was absolute. The same silence that had once made her seem out of place among louder, brasher pilots. She had no need to remind them what she had done. The wreckage spoke for her. Far below, scattered units of the enemy tried to rally. Some set up makeshift radar, others scrambled for visual tracking. None succeeded. The sky was empty now, the predator already gone. Their commanders argued about what had happened, each theory darker than the last. The fear was corrosive, infecting even seasoned soldiers. If one jet could bring down their shield, what chance did they have against a fleet? The whispers grew into something heavier. Dread. Units began reporting sightings of aircraft that weren't there, chasing shadows in the night. A missile team fired at a flock of birds, swearing they had seen a shape dive toward them. Another group abandoned their post entirely, convinced the ghost would strike again. Back at headquarters, Ramirez listened as intelligence officers relayed intercepted chatter from the enemy. He heard the phrase repeated again and again across frequencies: phantom, ghost pilot, unstoppable. He didn't smile, he didn't celebrate. He only glanced at her blip, still moving calmly toward base, and thought, let them believe what they want. Elara never once acknowledged the legends forming in her wake. She didn't care for nicknames, for fear, or for glory. She cared that the squadron had a way home. She cared that the mission wasn't lost. She cared that the machine she had rebuilt had held together when it mattered most. She adjusted her course slightly, scanning the gauges. Fuel was tight, but manageable. Her voice broke the comms one last time, steady as ever. 30 clicks to base. Maintain spacing. We'll land together. And just like that, the ghost pilot vanished into the night sky, alone, silent, leaving only smoke, ruin, and rumors behind. The runway lights stretched like a lifeline across the darkened airfield. One by one, battered aircraft limped back, their engines wheezing, fuselages scorched. Mechanics rushed forward, guiding survivors to hard stops. Fire crews poised in case one more jet decided to die on landing. Every touchdown felt like a miracle. And then her F-35 appeared, sliding in low, graceful as a blade. There was no smoke trailing her, no fire bleeding from her engines. It touched down smooth, steady, almost serene compared to the wreckage around it. As the canopy lifted, ground crews stopped where they stood. Some had heard the rumors already, whispers carried faster than radio. Signals. One pilot had cut a path through an impossible defense. Now they stared at the quiet figure climbing out of the cockpit, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes sharp but calm. Captain Elara Voss. Pilots who had staggered out of their own jets turned toward her, disbelief etched across their faces. Lieutenant Arik Danner was the first to speak, his voice hoarse but certain. You saved us. He stood stiffly, as though afraid gratitude might break him, then saluted with trembling hands. One by one, others followed, awkward at first, but genuine. These were men who hours earlier had scattered like frightened birds. Now they gathered around the hawk who had led them back. Elara returned no smile. She gave a small nod, her silence heavier than any words. Then she walked past them toward the hangar, boots crunching on the tarmac, her presence alone enough to hush the noise. Inside the command bunker, a meeting had already been called. General Ramirez sat at the head of the table, his grey eyes colder than steel. Around him, colonels and majors muttered over mission reports. Casualty. lists and grainy satellite images of the smoldering target zone. The tension was thick. No one wanted to be the first to admit what they all knew. Finally, Ramirez spoke. His voice was low, steady, but left no room for doubt. The mission is alive because of one pilot. You all saw the feeds. You all know what happened. Holt shifted in his chair, jaw tight, sweat still beading at his temples. He had been the voice of authority out there, the one shouting orders that dissolved into panic. And he had been the one to order Elara to turn back. Now, alive only because she hadn't listened, he felt every eye in the room turn toward him. She disobeyed, Holt said quickly, seizing the only defense he had. She ignored a direct order. That kind of recklessness. Ramirez cut him off with a glare. Recklessness? She struck the target in one pass. Do you call that recklessness or precision? The room fell silent. Holt's lips moved, but no sound came. An analyst cleared his throat, shuffling papers nervously. Sir, the enemy chatter. They're calling it a ghost pilot. They believe it wasn't even human. He looked up at Elara's name on the mission log, his voice faint. They're terrified. Ramirez leaned forward, planting his hands on the table. His gaze swept across every officer, his words hard as stone. Remember this moment. Remember the one you dismissed as a mechanic. Remember the one you called simple. She carried the mission when the rest of you lost control, and from this day forward, you will never underestimate her again. Silence followed. Not one officer dared to contradict him. Holt sat rigid, his face pale. In his mind, he could still hear her voice over the comms, steady, unshaken. The final words she had given him before doing the impossible. Watch me. The phrase burned deeper than any reprimand. It was not just defiance, it was proof. Proof that she had seen through the fear, through the chaos, through him. Proof that his authority had cracked where her resolve had not. Elara didn't stay for the meeting. She stood outside under the cool night air, helmet tucked under her arm, watching fuel trucks crawl across the field. She had no need to hear the debates or the praise. She knew what she had done, and that was enough. But inside the bunker, her name was no longer a joke whispered in hallways. It was a weight, a revelation, a line drawn in history. Captain Elara Voss, the simple woman who had turned an entire war with a single pass. They offered her medals before the dust had even settled. The brass wanted the ceremony fast, an image of triumph to plaster across. News outlets, a symbol of hope in a war where hope had grown thin. They rehearsed the words, prepared the cameras, even drafted speeches about courage and sacrifice. But when Captain Elara Voss was called into the briefing hall, she stood there in silence, her expression calm as stone. General Ramirez himself extended the commendation. For extraordinary valor under fire, for single-handedly striking the enemy command node, and saving this squadron, you are hereby... Elara raised a hand, cutting him off. Her voice was soft, almost casual, but it carried through the hall like a blade through fabric. I don't want it. Murmurs rippled across the room. Holt stiffened in the second row, his eyes narrowing, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. Ramirez blinked once, then lowered the medal. You don't want it? She shook her head. I did my job. Nothing more. One of the colonels leaned forward. Captain, you redefined this mission. You destroyed their defenses. Without you... Elara's gaze shifted, calm and unshaken. Without the squadron, there would have been no one to save. Without the machine holding together, I wouldn't have made it back. This isn't about me. The room fell into uneasy silence. For so long, officers had craved moments of glory, of recognition. But this woman, This pilot, who had just turned the tide of battle, stood there refusing to claim it. Ramirez studied her for a long moment. He had seen ambition break men, seen pride consume careers. But here was something rarer. Someone who understood that power did not come from medals or speeches, but from focus. He nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain, but understand, whether you accept it or not, what you did out there will not be forgotten." Her reply was quiet, almost dismissive. "I'm no one special. Just a simple woman." Those words, spoken without flourish, spread faster than any medal could. By the next morning, soldiers in the barracks were repeating them. Within days, the phrase reached the front lines, whispered by exhausted infantry staring up at the sky, a simple woman flying above us. The enemy too caught wind of it. Their chatter about a ghost pilot began to intertwine with stories of the simple woman whose jet had silenced their defenses in a single pass. Fear mixed with awe, myth with truth. Even Holt, who had mocked her most, could not escape it. Every time he walked the base, he heard her words echoing back at him, carried. In conversations carved into morale posters, etched into memory, "Watch me, just a simple woman." He avoided her presence now, not out of disdain, but because every glance reminded him of the night he had doubted, and she had proven him wrong. The weeks that followed saw the squadron rebuilt, their tactics reshaped. Analysts studied her maneuvers, trying to replicate them in simulations. None succeeded. The computers flagged her trajectory as impossible, the stress on the aircraft beyond safe tolerance. Yet she had done it, because she had trusted not in numbers, but in instinct. Instinct forged from years of listening to machines no one else respected. Soldiers began wearing small patches on their flight suits, simple white thread embroidered with the words, "A simple woman." Not official, not sanctioned, but worn with pride. It became a symbol not of gender, nor of background, but of defiance, the power of someone underestimated, someone dismissed, proving the world wrong. Elara never asked for it. She never wore one herself. She continued her routine as if nothing had changed. Pre-flight checks, silent meals, hours in the hangar fine-tuning the machine she trusted more than politics. When others tried to thank her, she nodded once and moved on. To her, the war was not about legends, it was about survival. And yet, legends grew anyway, because in the darkest hour, when an entire squadron scattered in panic, it was not pedigree or pride that carried them back. It was one quiet voice, steady and unwavering, that had cut through the chaos. The story would be told and retold in barracks, in classrooms, in hushed tones on the front lines. The night a simple woman flew an impossible line, struck the target in one pass, and gave life back to men who thought they were already dead. And the truth behind it all was this: simplicity is not weakness. Simplicity is focus. Simplicity is clarity when the world drowns in noise. Elara Voss remained what she had always been: calm, silent, dismissed by some, misunderstood by many. But in the end, it was her silence that carried the greatest weight, her simplicity that reshaped the battlefield. A simple woman, nothing more, and yet everything they needed. When the squadron scattered, everyone thought the mission was lost, but one woman, quiet, overlooked, dismissed, proved that sometimes the smallest voice can carry the greatest power. That's the story of Captain Elara Voss, a simple woman who flew a line no one else dared and struck the target in a single pass. If her story moved you, if it reminded you that true strength often hides where the world least expects, it Make sure you subscribe to this channel, A Simple Woman, so you don't miss the next untold story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, called too simple, too ordinary, only to rise in a way no one expected? Share your story in the comments. Your voice may inspire someone else watching tonight. And while you're here, stay tuned and check out the other videos waiting on your screen. Each one reveals another hidden story of resilience, quiet power, and the moments that change everything. Because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that roar the loudest.